The life of a trucker is by no means easy. Driving for hours on end can certainly be a grueling prospect, and can result in them witnessing some very creepy and strange things. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. I've seen plenty of stuff out there in the interstate. My first couple of years, I was a night driver, so it was hard to see things sometimes. But the one time in Pennsylvania was me trying to follow a fellow flatbedder who was hauling serious arse through the mountains. At one point I start to fall back because I can feel the van starting to lean. It wasn't long after that I reached down to take a swig of the handy monster I had. And I look up, and there's a guy standing off the shoulder just outside the tree line, wearing what appeared to be some type of soldier uniform. He looked like he was from the Revolutionary/War era. He had a musket as well. As I approached him, I could see him staring right at me. And then he starts walking back into the tree line, still looking at me. Before he manages to make it through the trees, he disappears. Like, literally vanishes in thin air. I had my windows down, and the air in the area got really cold. And after about a mile, it seemed to warm up again. I had a really sad feeling come over me for a while afterwards. Needless to say, I didn't stop for the rest of my shift. New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah are some of the states that to this day I still see shit in the skies that I can't explain. Lights rapidly changing directions and taking off at blinding speeds, but no sound barrier being broken. I've seen lights hovering over the desert several miles off the interstate, and then it suddenly takes off or just cuts out. Various shapes and sizes from what I can make out. I know military aircrafts pretty well, and some of them more than likely were, but some of them absolutely cannot be military aircrafts currently in mainstream use. Conventional aircrafts don't move like that. The most vivid one would be at an off-ramp in New Mexico. I stopped to take a whiz, and decided to turn around to give it a 15-minute break, since my arse was sore anyway. As I'm stargazing and admiring how clear the sky is, I saw what looked like a formation of lights in the shape of a triangle lift off the desert floor and then take off into the sky. I kept my eyes on it, and it just kept gaining altitude until the lights just disappeared. I looked down at my watch and noticed that it wasn't ticking, so I pulled my phone out, and it's off. I turned my phone on, and according to the time on my phone, it had been 5 minutes since my watch stopped. I felt like whatever it was that just took off had something to do with it. Kent, Texas is another one. There's an old Chevron station, and it seems like FedEx drivers like stopping in there in droves. I'm guessing it's a popular drop and hook point for them or something. But I stop one day, and I need to take a whiz. I don't know why I didn't just stop in Van Horn, so I pull off, and I roll into the empty lot across the street. Kent is an abandoned town. I walk up to the bush line and noticed a makeshift fire pit. The wood is somewhat burnt, but not all the way. The weird thing is that there is an unscathed dollar bill stuck in the wood. For a second I was like, ooh, piece of candy. But then, I got this sudden feeling of nope, so I left it alone and went to the toilet. As I'm walking back, I look over and get a very negative feeling. I look to the ground in front of me, and bam, there's a rattlesnake looking right at me. I stop dead in my tracks and walk carefully around it, and it seems to be staring at me. I run as fast as I can, back to my truck feeling like somebody was behind me. I kicked up a lot of dust getting out of there, and I have never stopped in Kent since. This other time in Missouri, I stopped at an off-ramp to stretch and take a breather. As I was smoking a cigarette, a little girl from some direction I couldn't figure out giggles and says, "Hi, mister." My initial reaction was a bit creeped out. What is a kid doing out here in the middle of the night? So I talk back and say hi. Then she responds with, "My mummy says you'll be okay. Don't worry." Now utterly confused, I ask her what she means. No response. Then suddenly I feel like somebody is standing next to me. But it doesn't feel negative or bad. It just feels like somebody is right there next to me. Since it didn't have a negative vibe to it, I just finished my cigarette and left. Later on down the road, I realized that I forgot to fuel up at my last stop when the warning light came on. So I scrambled to look at my GPS to find the nearest truck stop, and I find one and set the course. As I roll up to the truck stop, my truck starts spluttering, and I barely make it to the fuel line before the truck starts dying. I ran out of fuel just as I got to the fuel line. It wasn't until I was fueling up that it occurred to me what the hell happened at my last stop. This is my final tale though. One night in Arizona, a woman was begging for money, which isn't uncommon at truck stops. She gave the whole sob story about her boyfriend leaving her, she didn't have a job, and lost the apartment. Her 2 kids were hungry, and she didn't know what to do. With me being a social creature, I let the conversation go on for some reason. To make it short, she was molested by her father as a child, raped on several occasions in her teen years, and then found a lesser of an evil boyfriend who tried to get her into drugs, got her pregnant and beat her all the time. I hear that kind of stuff frequently, but just in case she was telling the truth, I gave her what I had in my pockets, which ended up being around $40. She broke down and cried right there, and I started to wonder that perhaps she was telling the truth. She walked away after some more small talk, and I go inside to get dinner, and unbelievably, I see her with her 2 kids that look as sad as can be, ordering dinner. They all looked depressed. I knew at that moment that she wasn't lying about a thing she told me, and I felt a lot of remorse for not doing more. So I told the waitress to put their meals on my tab. The look on her face when the waitress said that their meal was being paid for by someone else was a look I shall never forget. Number 2. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Pines to Albuquerque. 29 Pines is located in the desolate highway east of LA. The shortcut was all 2-lane roads through the total nothingness, except passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side, and a salt flat on the other. It was also at the time a hot spot for satanic group activity. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon, and I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign, just to prove to my friends who dared me to take a picture when I got to Route I-40. I got back in my truck and proceeded to drive up the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stop sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and 2 bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber around. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it was staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out seemed unthinkable. It was the horror movie move. I scanned the road and saw that I might just be able to get by, so I drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either bodies on the road, and I continued forward a couple of 100 feet, and slowed down so that I could breathe and let my heart slow down. I decided at that moment to look back, and the two bodies had gotten up on their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road. At that moment my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor, and I didn't let up for a long time. I will never know what would have happened to me if I'd have gotten out to check, or stopped my vehicle closer to them. Somehow I don't think it would have been good, and sometimes real life can be scarier than any movie. Number 3. My dad had been a truck driver my whole life. The one incident that sticks out to me the most is when he saw someone in this company accidentally kill a lady. Or rather, the lady was killed by the guy's truck. There was this notoriously bad intersection, and the woman just blew through it illegally and out in front of my dad's co-worker's loaded semi, with my dad directly behind him. A lot of people don't realize that trucks can't slow down like cars. They have to gear down because of how heavy they are. She was killed instantly, and her family later tried to sue the company my dad worked for, which went nowhere. Also, when I was a kid, he was in a grain elevator explosion. My dad's truck was about the 10th in line, and the first couple of trucks were basically vaporized. It was a pretty scary day, because we saw about it on the news before he was able to get hold of us. Number 4. For the last 7 years, I've been a bull hauler. I've seen some messed up stuff having to do with cattle, but the scariest thing to ever happen to me was on a trip to East Texas. I had left out from around Austin and went up to just north of Amarillo to kick them off at a feedlot. Around 600-mile trip. I was feeling pretty good, so I decided to turn around and come on back to the cattle company instead of taking my break. I called dispatch and he gave me a sale barn to go pick up and bring back to the company. When I got back I was pretty wore out, but they told me that a truck had broken down heading to Texarkana and he needed me to go and get the cattle. I thought, sure, I can do this. I made it about an hour from Texarkana, on a little 2-lane Texas back road, talking to a friend of mine on the phone to try and stay awake. When I fell asleep, I remember hearing my friend yelling my name and waking up just to find myself off in the grass with a cowboy on a horse right in front of me roping a calf. He roped, dialed off, and turned to face me, and just as I hit him he disappeared. It was a hallucination. Scared me so bad I was wide awake for the rest of the trip. I used to think being outlaw was me being a badass. I would run 1,500 to 2,000 miles with no sleep and just call it another day at work. I now realize it was just me being stupid and putting myself and innocent people in danger. Not something I will ever do again. Number 5. My dad was a trucker for years before a work injury grounded him. He came home white as a sheet one day and wouldn't talk for 2 days. When he did, he told us that a lady had ran a red light and tried to speed underneath his trailer. This was shortly after the Fast and Furious movie came out, and the resulting wreck turned the car into a convertible and decapitated the woman. The side of his trailer was a Rorschach of blood and grey matter, and it took my dad 2 months of therapy to get back in his rig, and even though the insurance company said it was fixable, he scrapped the trailer and started pulling trailers for a big company instead of his own. I just wish that some people would be more careful on the road. Number 6. I spent the past 10 years as a truck driver, so I've had my fair share of stories. Coming out of Washington State Terminal, I was asked to take one of our drivers to Southern California. Not a big deal, I've done it before. But let's meet our friend Gibson. You see, Gibson here seemed like a normal, cheerful and delightful person to keep in company, whilst talking your ear off. However, this all changed once the sun went down. Gibson here turns to me and says, "Hey, can you pull over for a sec? I need to ward off the snake people." This is where my brain doesn't quite process this, and I say, "What?" He repeats the same line, and here's where my spidey sense tells me that if Gibson doesn't ward off his snake people, I'm gonna have a bigger problem than this guy's cookie getting flipped. So I pull over and he gets out. Now here comes the weird. He does this dance in front of my headlights, and all I can say is that he certainly does his snake warding dance. Now here's my dilemma. This guy obviously has a few fries short of a Happy Meal, but I was asked to drive his ass to SoCal. Unfortunately, I think too long about this, and Gibson is sitting next to me again in the passenger seat, as if nothing had happened. I drive 1,200 miles without stopping, and Gibson gets his new truck in SoCal, and I never give another person I don't know a lift again. But hey, at least I didn't have to deal with the snake people, right? Number 7. I was running on Kansas Highway 96, out of the Great Bend early one morning. Dawn was just peeking over the horizon back to the east, and I rounded the curve out of the town, heading west, when I see Bambi and the gang crossing the road. It must have been at least 12 of them. I get up in the middle of the road and I lay on the air horn. They stop crossing, but they all start running along both sides of the road in the direction I'm going. I get back on the throttle, and just as I come up on the group, I see 2 of the deer on the north side deciding that they now want to join the group on the south side. Reflexes kicked in, and I jump into the oncoming lane to avoid them. I saw one's face as clear as day, as my fender and the door went past him. He didn't hit the corner door of my trailer or my drives, luckily. However, he did hit his head on the side of my trailer. It must have been enough to daze him as I watch him fall and get hit by my back hopper on the side. He went under my trailer tandems when he exploded. I was gross overweight, so he didn't stand a chance. I pulled over about a mile up the road where it was wide enough to do so, and went to look over my trail. I didn't see any marks on my trailer or hopper, not anything much of the trailer tandems. The only thing was left was a tuft of fur or two, and blood dripping on both mud flaps. Number 8. My father and his friends are truckers, and here are some stories that they've shared with me. This one is about how my father lost his job. He worked for an owner-operator that had 3 trucks, one for himself, one for his brother, and one for my dad. Well, Larry was out on a run, and from what I understand it was somewhere in the south. Anyway, Larry was stopped at a stoplight. The light turns green, and he starts to pull through the intersection. Some guys coming the opposite way blow through the stoplight, T-boning Larry's truck. The car went straight under the trailer, crushing the driver and killing him instantly. That's a pretty horrifying thing to witness, right? Larry struggled with PTSD after that. But here's the worst part of the story. The guy that died was married with kids. The family brought suit against Larry, and the court ruled that since he was a professional driver, he should have seen the guy about to run the red light and stopped, thus preventing the accident. Never mind the fact the guy was driving way above the speed limit, something like 60 miles per hour in a 35-mile zone, and was nowhere in sight when the light changed and Larry started to move forward. Larry ended up selling 2 of his 3 trucks to pay for the damages from the suit and to bring a countersuit to court. The truck that Larry kept was given to his brother because he didn't want to drive anymore after that. No idea what happened to the countersuit, sadly. Dad kept in touch with Larry for a little while after that, but Larry felt really bad about needing to sell my dad's truck and the whole accident in general. So my dad just kind of left him alone and eventually lost contact. But I hope he got the justice he deserved. The second story actually happened to a close friend of mine, called Paul. Paul was driving down a mountainside in West Virginia when some car speeds up behind him and passes. Well, the car missed a bend in the road and hit the guardrail. Paul stops his truck, gets out, and sees if anyone is hurt. He walks up to the car, and apparently everyone seems fine, because they're A, massively drunk, and B, busy throwing empty beer cans and cases of beer over the guardrail so the police don't find them. Except one guy, who was bleeding from a facial wound. But he was throwing beer cans as fast as everyone else could, so Paul let him be. Paul sticks around until the cops show up. He doesn't say too much about the drunk guys, but when the police arrive, he makes sure to point out the guy with the facial wound, which gets a laugh out of the officers. This guy had been sitting in the back seat of the car when it hit the guardrail. Apparently he lurched forward in the collision and slammed his face into the beer he was holding, which cut a perfect outline of the top of the can, pop tab and all, onto his forehead. Number 9. This one happened mostly to my wife, but I was involved. We met for dinner after work and we were heading home. At the time she had a small car, and I was in my massive truck. She was far enough ahead of me for me to make her car look like a dot in the horizon. And then she calls me sounding scared and says that some guy in one of those smaller Japanese SUVs looks angry and keeps motioning for her to pull over. Now, there was almost no traffic, and we'd been on the road for a while, so it's not like she had an opportunity to cut him off. Anyway, while she's on the phone, he even swerves at her a bit, trying to force her off the road. I told her to hold on and slow down if she could manage it. I stood on the gas, hoping the truck wouldn't blow up. Unfortunately, it didn't. It wheezed, rattled, and vibrated up to speed that was most definitely not safe. As I closed the gap, the guy got more and more aggressive, and when I got there, she dove into the emergency lane and stood on her brakes as I bore down on him like an express train. Action almost always beats reaction, and this time was no different. I got between them. He pulled into the other lane as if to let me pass, and I got right onto his bumper, flashing lights and honking, which was probably not the smartest move I could have made, since any braking on his part would have been bad, but at the time I was beyond caring. All of a sudden, Road Rage McDouchebag realizes he's about to become the recipient of a steel enema if he doesn't mend his ways, and he took off. My wife caught up, and we took the next exit. She was shaking up a bit, but otherwise okay. We called the police with his plate number, but unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. Number 10. I worked as a trucker for a year or so, and had some weird experiences. One of the strangest things I saw was off the Trans-Canada in BC. It was surprisingly dead on the road I was on, with nobody going in either direction, which is weird even for Wednesday in the wee hours of the morning. I found a corner and see a pillar of smoke. My initial thought was, that explains the no traffic, and I start to slow down since it's kind of a blind corner, and I see that there's only one car off in a ditch, fire blazing. I pull off the road to see if anyone is injured as I can't see anyone, and on the other side, the clearing is, no joke, 4 or 5 black bears standing on their back legs. As I notice them, they all begin roaring like crazy, like I intruded on some sort of party or something. I back away back into my truck and watch them as they calmly continue to watch the fire. I don't even know what happened that morning, and I will never know. Bears are weird. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I just wanted to say thank you for your continued support and viewership. It really means the world to me that you guys keep coming back to this channel and watching the new content I make for you guys every day. So thank you. Just a reminder that I have launched my merch store, so if you'd like a unique and limited edition piece of official Mortis Media merchandise, get your hands on a t-shirt quickly. The stocks will not last forever. And remember that if you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment, as it's a really great way to help support the channel and I appreciate it tremendously. And if you'd like to do something incredible to help support the channel even further, feel free to visit my Patreon. You can find a link in the description as well as the links to my social media. And if you want your story read on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to Reddit or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.